Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of It's a Beautiful Mess. Hey honey, how you doing?
Hello, and hello.
Oh, wow.
How are you doing is the question.
I'm sleepy.
Are you sleeping?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know how it is after church.
Yeah, I had to push through a few things within the past hour or so, but I'm here now. I have no choice. I need to make sure I am alert and aware for our last
This is our
episode
last episode.
for this
Oh,
season. Now,
yeah.
don't get discouraged, guys. We're gonna have another season coming, so this isn't it. But this is our last episode for this
season
season.
1.
But yeah, I'm ready.
Man.
I know, right?
Yeah, season 1, folks.
Yeah.
This is our wrap up. So hopefully you enjoy it.
Yes.
Are we ready to get into what we're talking about?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so we're continuing our conversation about intimacy. If you were with us during the last episode, we discussed intimacy with God. And this time we're talking about intimacy with each other. So between you and your spouse. And as you can imagine, we're dynamic individuals, right? Mm. So there are multiple layers to us, which is why we want to make sure that we do justice to this topic as it relates to intimacy with each other. For example, there's various aspects of what makes Keyona, right?
Yes, it is.
There are various aspects of what makes Stefphon who he is, and same for you all. Mm-hmm. You know, who you are, what makes you who you are impacts how you show up in your marriage. And so we want to make sure hopefully we do justice to this topic of intimacy. I think it's important to note, if we're not aware and attentive to the whole person, we're missing some vital opportunities to connect with each other, to develop a dynamic understanding of our spouses and ourselves.
I agree.
Yeah. So to be prepared to engage with the whole person, I think one must first know what influences our perspective, what influences our beliefs, our behavior, and our moral compass. Mm-hmm. But how do we discover these things about ourselves and our spouses? We suggest ensuring you are emotionally, physically, and spiritually connected in your marriage. So we want to actually unpack those elements, emotions, your physical being, and your spiritual being. And again, hopefully, as we move through these elements, it helps you to get some ideas and takeaways for how you can engage with your spouse and become more connected with them. Mm-hmm. So what I'd like to do is start with addressing emotional intimacy, if that's all right with you.
Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Let's get into it.
All right. So I don't want to say suffered, but I have battled with emotional intimacy and showing up emotionally in my marriage in a way that's healthy for years. And it's the deliverance and the sanctification process that God has taken me through to bring me to where I am now has taken a lot of time. So I say that to say that this portion of our discussion today is near and dear to my heart. All right. Okay. So knowing your spouse emotionally means understanding what makes them happy and sad, what triggers them and motivates them, what causes our emotions to move in one direction or the other is in part tied to our life experiences, also our upbringing and the intake of information from various sources, like the world around us. So how do we get to a place where we know our spouse's triggers, whether good or bad? Mm-hmm. And it is actually pretty simple, you guys. And the answer is you communicate. Okay. And I know it seems overly simplified, but truly communication is one of the major keys to marriage. I don't want to get off topic, but we make a lot of assumptions with in ourselves and about our spouses. And if we just communicated, a lot of that could be cleared up. But anyway, I digress. When I say communicate, right, I don't mean be obnoxious because I've done that. Let me explain. Don't ask impulsive questions about why they're acting so weird, right? Or, why are you so upset about everything? Or, why are you freaking out over quote unquote the smallest things? Like I'm not saying to ask your spouse those type of questions. When I say communication is the key to unlocking, understanding your spouse emotionally, those aren't the questions I want you to ask. Okay.
Yeah. I don't even see those as a form of communication. I see it as a form, like you say, a potential nag, or, tell me what your problem is. Like, what's wrong with you?
Right. What is your problem?
Versus asking those questions like, hey, I'm concerned, expressing that you're concerned about their behavior. And is there anything you would like to share? Versus saying, hey, what's wrong with you?
Right. Like, why are you being so weird today?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's not the end. Don't
do
communication.
No.
So I guess I should tell you what we should be doing then, right? So number one,
help us.
Right? Please. I'm here to help. Number one, we must set aside some time to be intentional about getting to know our spouse emotionally. This might mean creating a list, maybe. Okay. I'm just giving you a suggestion. Create a list of questions you want to ask your spouse. Maybe you notice they don't tell you that they love you unless you initiated saying it first. And you want to know why. Why don't you ever tell me you love me unless I tell you I love you? Or why do you seem upset like 80% of the time or 50% of the time that you interact with me? These are observations that you notice, right? And questions that you want answers to. But be prepared to provide like some context for your questions and ensure the atmosphere is appropriate for the conversation. Share some examples for any questions that you have, and discussing things from your perspective is also important. What you want to do is explain things with you as the focus, as opposed to pointing the finger at your spouse. Otherwise, it may seem like an accusation, or it may put someone on the defense. So, for example, if you feel alone in your marriage, and believe it or not, there are people who are married but still feel alone, right? Yep. So if you feel alone in your marriage, you might say something like, I feel alone in our marriage, and then explain why. Add the because. And then say something like, can we discuss building in more time together? Instead of, here's what I don't want you to do. You don't love me. You never show me any attention. Yes. Right?
Yes.
Two different approaches. And the difference is the tone and the focus of your words. The former shows your vulnerability and the clarity of thought without accusation by, seeking resolution. The latter example points the finger and causes someone to be defensive, right? So often we go in with guns blazing because we lack emotional intelligence and godly wisdom, or at least that was my story. So here are some practical ways to foster emotional intelligence in your marriage. And this is not in any particular order. So number one, intentionality is important. When you're communicating with your spouse, ensure that you're alone, as I said before, because we don't need an audience.
Exactly.
And conflict should be handled privately. And you also have your spouse's undivided attention. And the reason I say that conflict should be handled privately is because it was stated in Matthew's chapter 18. You can go and check that out, verses 15 through 20. It reminds us that while, conflict may occur, you want to do that privately. And being alone with your spouse ensures you're protecting them too, if we are protecting their emotions, and then there's no outside influences. And we're removing any opportunity to embarrass each other as well. And all this includes your kids of a certain age. I know when they're infants and, toddlers, one of you may be holding the child or, they may be sleeping or feeding or something. But those that are of age that can go into another room while you have a conversation, you should do that. Second, always consider your intent when engaging with your spouse. Take a moment to think through what you'll say, what you want to say. Why do you want to say it? And how will what you want to say, how will that affect your spouse emotionally? And what is it that you're trying to accomplish by saying these things?
Exactly.
In other words, will what you're about to say result in peace or war? You all know, if you've heard me say that, if you listen to our other episodes, that's my thing. There is a difference, right? Are you trying to create war or peace in your marriage? And I will remind you, and hopefully it's peace that you're looking for. I will remind you that Jesus told us in Matthew chapter 5, verse 9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they are called children of God. That should be our focus when we are trying to resolve conflict and, address conflict rather with our spouse, or we have questions. The focus should always be to seek peace with your spouse, not war.
Yeah, I want to say too, if you have the thought, and I like how you explain that, because we have to stop and think, what are our reasons,
right,
of bringing this up or having this conversation? If you ever have that thought where it's like, yeah, I just want to show him he's wrong,
right?
Then guess what? It's not going to go very well.
It's not.
So yeah, definitely, like my wife said, stop and think about your
these
intentions
questions,
and really dig deep down, because you may think, oh no, I'm just, I just want to find out. I just want to get clarity and information. But
you really
deep down inside, is that really what you want to do?
You want to read somebody and you want to get your point across.
Yes.
You want to be heard and you want them to be told, right? And you want to do the telling.
Exactly. So just think real hard about it before you go into that conversation.
For sure. And to my husband's point, my third point, is going to be always seek out guidance from God. Read your word to ensure you're honoring God and your spouse regarding how you plan to address anything with them.
Yes.
Okay. So those are my 3 points. I have a little example. If what I'm saying isn't totally clear, I do want to provide just a little example. Maybe this will help out.
Okay.
So assume your spouse called you stupid, right? Because of something you did, and you didn't like it, obviously. So you wanted to address it. I wanted to give you an example of how you might go about doing this using some of the keys that I just shared, the 3 examples I just shared.
All right, teach us. How about that? Come on.
So number 1, right, we want to, I mentioned that we want to be intentional previously and, making sure that we do things privately. So if you want to address this example, right, where you were called a name by your spouse, determine whether or not the timing is right. Is it in an open space? Is it in private? Or do you need to schedule some time to sit down and have this conversation with your spouse? And then number 2, and the reason why I say be intentional is because I'm trying to help you refrain from making an emotional outburst, right? And if you're intentional, that means you recognize that, hey, this triggered me. I didn't like being called stupid. And now what are you going to do with that information? Yeah. Okay. So the next step is to say, okay, well, they called me a name. I did not like that. I want to address this. Is now a good time to address it? Yes or no? If it's not, then determine when would be a better time. Well, there are people around. We got family. We got the kids. We're out having a good time. Because you feel something doesn't mean you need to address it immediately.
Exactly.
Sometimes you just need to wait until not sometimes, all the time, according to the word, you need to address conflict in private. Yes. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And number 2, I think this helps me. Okay. You don't have to because everybody don't need to do this. But if you're someone who needs to get their thoughts together, I encourage you to write your thoughts down. Write down what you want to say, because that will help you see what you want to say, and then fix the parts that need to be fixed, right? Where we might feel a little angry or upset, or we might be calling them a name,
Mm-hmm.
and think about explaining in your writing how you feel. Explain your feelings. How did them calling you stupid make you feel? Right? And what type of resolution do you hope to reach in this conversation? It would be another question that you need to give an answer to when you're writing these things down. Then, of course, as my husband and I always say, take the time to pray about it. Make sure that you're reading your word, and reading the word helps you find wise counsel and examples, right? Where conflict has taken place and how was it resolved.
Proverbs is my big one.
Proverbs.
Helps you out.
Yeah. Proverbs is all full of wisdom.
Yeah.
Okay. So please seek out God's word before you address your spouse. If you don't feel peace, and you're feeling angry or irritated, and you're thinking to yourself, no, I need them to know right now. And I understand that, because I used to be there, right? You want to defend yourself, and you don't want to come off as weak and all of these things. But that's something else for me to unpack at a later time, because I've been there and I do understand that. But if you follow the guidance that I'm giving you, we'll be able to be heard by our spouse a lot better than if we're yelling at them.
That is true.
Okay, so something you might say, let's say you did all the things that I just mentioned, right?
Okay.
You might say something like this: yesterday, you said I was stupid because I did X, right? And I felt, fill in the blank with how you felt about them saying that. It hurts me when you speak to me this way because, and you fill in the blank, right? Can we work on not calling each other names because, and then you fill in the blank, right? So in this example, you focused on how you were impacted instead of attacking them with subliminal messages and passive aggressive behavior, or aggressive behavior. Therefore, allowing them to experience you in a calm yet vulnerable state. And you might get an apology, right? It's more likely that you'll get an apology and an explanation for why they called you a name, as opposed to attacking them, which could just result in you all arguing. So in that example that I shared, where you are addressing your spouse calmly and vulnerably, you could further explore why they're more prone to call you names instead of by your name, right?
Yeah.
And who knows, you might find out that they were spoken to that way growing up, or they thought it was an acceptable way to express their opinions, or their parents spoke to them, or their parents spoke to them, or to each other. Your parents may have spoken to each other in a like manner. Yeah. So it's just something, an environment they grew up in and were prone to speaking that way. You never know, right?
Yeah, and that's a part of understanding. That's a part of having an understanding of your spouse too, and having those ESPM check-ins that we solicit throughout our episodes, is being able to see what some of those potentials, and I'm gonna say potential until you identify them as trauma.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, if one is growing up in a household where they're getting cursed at, their parents say, "Hey, you effing this and you effing that. You need to clean up your effing room." It's like, oh, that's how normal. My mama talk.
Yeah.
That's how we talk in the house. My whole family curse. We all curse at each other, and it's normal.
Right.
So that bleeds into the marriage.
Right.
Eventually, especially if you've never had your spouse to get, angry in a certain manner. Okay, now you're experiencing now that this is normal for that individual to hear. So it's normal for them to say it.
Yeah.
So definitely have that understanding. And then I want to go back to the advice you gave. I even was touched by the approach, and I didn't even do anything based on the example you gave. It's like, oh man, that was so inviting.
Right.
But the example she gave is so inviting for the hearer. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But dang, I never thought of it
Right.
in that way. Versus yelling and, you know, displaying your emotions on how angry you was about that individual calling you stupid. It's more inviting to hear in this manner, so that way you can stop and reflect, like, dang, you know, I never thought of it this way.
Right. I didn't know I was making you feel that way.
Exactly. And then I want to also say this, and I'll let you continue.
No, you're fine.
This is not only for women, this is for men as well.
Absolutely.
Men, please express how you feel in reference to your spouse speaking to you in a manner that you do not approve of, or that makes you feel unworthy.
Yeah.
So both men and women, we have to communicate. This is not a woman thing. I know my wife is speaking on it, but this also goes for men as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to my husband's point, our goal as husbands and wives, what should be to protect and positively influence the emotions of our spouses while seeking to understand their current state and how they got there.
Exactly.
So that we can continue to pray for each other and motivate one another to more godly interactions.
Yeah.